Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about actually a series of videos that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be reviewed by that Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation, a channel that I like to review quite a bit because Dante, once again, in my view, he's very much like that of a politician. And he of course, likes to go on certain narratives and overall likes to go off of certain stories, which a lot of the times, of course, only fit his narrative. Once again, I keep telling a lot of people that whenever it comes to new media and that of the LDBC, and also old media included, that a lot of these guys that they claim that they're for the truth and for objectivity and treating fighters the same and yada 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 yada, but that's not really what a lot of these channels or a lot of these groups are for. Basically, once again, they're like politicians where they claim that they're there for your well-being, and they claim once again that they're there for fairness and all this other stuff, but really all they're there for is to push their agenda. It's no different with that of Dante's Boxing Nation and a lot of these other guys. But anyways, the video that of course we're going to be talking about today, there's been conversations recently about a possible 5v5 tournament between that of American fighters and Mexican fighters, I believe, which of course if it were actually able to get set up by that of Turkey Alashi, I believe the man you see right there on the right, of course it would be a great card. Do I believe that all the guys are going to agree, to that deal? Probably not, but we'll see what ends up happening there. But of course, the fight that is the most talked about potentially on this card, if it were to happen, would be that of Canelo Alvarez versus that of Terence Bud Crawford. And, I think that most people, of course, would want to see Canelo Alvarez fight that of David Benavidez, including myself. And I think that if David Benavidez is going to continue to campaign at that of the 168-pound weight class, that of course that's the fight that Canelo Alvarez is eventually going to have to take. But of course, there's also a lot of people pushing for this Terence Bud Crawford fight as well, including that of Dante's Boxing Nation. And listen, what I'll state is this: I don't mind if you're going to push for the Terence Bud Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez fight. I don't mind if you're going to push that hard for that fight and state that, oh, Canelo, that he needs, to really, fight that at Terence Bud Crawford because he fought Amir Khan and he was willing to fight Errol Spence and all that other stuff. I don't mind that. But what I am going to state is this: the things that Dante's Boxing Nation is stating about Canelo Alvarez and, about some other fighters that he usually does not tend to like. If you believe that Canelo Alvarez's skill set is actually that limited as what you state, to the point to where he's just an average Mexican fighter, no problem. But then for Terence Bud Crawford, apparently being so far ahead of everyone else in terms of the skill set game, as what Dante's Boxing Nation will try to tell you, what that says to me is that if Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Bud Crawford happens, that the only thing that is going to be the difference if Canelo Alvarez wins is going to be the size advantage, and that apparently it's not going to be the skill set advantage at all. That overall, or, combined with the skills. That's what Dante is trying to tell us. That's what Dante is trying to say. So, what I'm going to state is this: if you're pushing this hard for the Terence Bud Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez fight, no problem. But if Canelo Alvarez ends up getting in the ring against Terence Bud Crawford and ends up completely whooping his ass and ends up making Terence Bud Crawford take a knee in the 10th round and they call it the 10, or if Canelo Alvarez just plainly beats that of Terence Bud Crawford, no problem. But then let's give Canelo Alvarez the respect overall of beating that of Terence Bud Crawford if you're one of the guys that is pushing so hard for this fight. If Canelo Alvarez ends up winning overall against that of Terence Bud Crawford, let's start also calling Canelo Alvarez the clear best fighter of his generation and no longer Terence Bud Crawford. All right, let's do that because once again, if we're talking about other fights, Sugar Ray Leonard gets a great amount of credit for defeating Marvin Hagler. So if Canelo Alvarez ends up defeating that of Terence Bud Crawford, and when it comes to the height and range, Crawford is actually more lengthier and taller than that of Canelo Alvarez. And Canelo really is more of a natural 160 pounder anyway. No problem. So then if Canelo Alvarez beats the shit out of Terence Bud Crawford, at least potentially, then give Canelo Alvarez a lot of credit, especially as the best fighter of his generation. Or at least give him more credit than say, a certain said fighter like that of a Marvin Hagler. Because Canelo Alvarez did something then that Marvin Hagler was not able to do. Marvin Hagler was not able to beat the greatest welterweight of his day. He was not able to beat that of Sugar Ray Leonard. If Canelo was able to beat the Terence Bud Crawford, if he was able to beat the Sugar Ray Leonard of his day, then give Canelo Alvarez Marvin Hagler like props. But Dante is not going to do that. The reason why I wanted to review these series of videos is because I'm not a fan of these games that a lot of these guys really like to push. Not just the LDBC and new media, but really a lot of people in general, where basically they love to antagonize certain fighters or athletes, or they love to say, let's make this happen, let's make this happen. It reminds me a lot of LeBron James, where LeBron James, no matter what he does, it's always looked at as in a positive way. But anytime he loses, they basically try to make excuses for him. So the point being is this: if Terence Bud Crawford, once again, if you want this fight so badly because you believe that Crawford would beat up Canelo Alvarez and all sort of stuff, no problem. But then when Crawford loses to Canelo, if he loses to Canelo, give Canelo Alvarez full props. Call him the best fighter of his generation, because apparently Crawford is that much more skilled than Canelo Alvarez, and the only thing that Canelo apparently would have is size advantage. And to be honest with you, it's not like Canelo has as massive of a size advantage over Crawford as what some other guys would have. For example, Tyson Fury had a decent size advantage over that of Usyk. If Usyk can beat Tyson Fury when it comes down to it, then Terence Bud Crawford should be able to defeat Canelo Alvarez, if Canelo Alvarez is as limited a fighter as what Dante's Boxing Nation always tries to allege. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So there's a very good chance we're not going to get Canelo Alvarez versus David Benavidez. But there is a very good chance now we're going to end up getting Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford. Saudi Arabia's Turki Al-Sheikh, he's now declared that that's the fight that he's working on. He wants the fight.
Well, Canelo Alvarez so far has not really shown any interest in that fight whatsoever. And to be honest with you, I don't blame Canelo Alvarez, because why would you want to fight a guy that is particularly dangerous in his skill set? But then on top of that, he's going to be moving up 3 weight classes. Now, for those of us that know boxing, we know that Canelo is not really a 168-pounder. He's really more of a middleweight. He's really more of a 160-pounder. Every time Canelo has been in the ring against someone that pretty much has been a natural 160 to 168-pounder, they've pretty much all been bigger than him. Whether it be Golovkin, Danny Jacobs, Caleb Plant, John Ryder even was a little bit bigger than Canelo, Jaime Munguia. Like, it literally doesn't matter. Canelo has been outsized, for years. But anyways, when it comes down to it, once again, so if Crawford is going to move up, once again, that means that Dante is going to give Canelo Alvarez a great amount of credit, right? We all know that that's not going to happen. And that's why I'm saying, once again, if you're pushing for this fight, no problem. But then if Canelo wins this fight, at least give him a great amount of credit. You don't have to give him the full amount of credit as, say, if the fighters are in the same weight class. But a lot of, like Dante, for example, and a lot of his followers and subscribers, they always try to sit here and act like, oh, well, Canelo is just this basic Mexican fighter. Dude, you can't be a 4-weight division champion and be beating guys that are bigger than you for the past several years of your career, and legit A-grade level fighters. At that, like Munguia and Plant and Callum Smith and Billy Joe Saunders and Danny Jacobs and guys like that. And, Jamel Charlo, who's, probably around the same size as Canelo. But, when it comes down to, once again, you can't beat fighters like that repeatedly and just be a basic Mexican fighter. That doesn't make any sense.
Be either late this year or early 2025 at a stadium in New York, Las Vegas, or even LA. His Excellency, he said, I want this fight. And we are thinking to do it in America because we want it huge. Guys, we finally have someone in the sport of boxing that is committed, that is completely dedicated to making the fights that the fans want to see. Now, of course, we would rather see Canelo versus David Benavidez, but I do believe the next big thing would be Canelo versus Terence Crawford. Even though Terence Crawford would be fighting at a major disadvantage, when it comes to Canelo Alvarez, all you could do is be happy that he's fighting someone that we know.
And that's Dante's Boxing Nation's first hint right there. And this is a big part of the reason why Canelo Alvarez stated that there was really no interest for him to take this fight. I was actually in a live debate with someone, excuse me, I think it was about a few weeks to a month ago now. And we were having a conversation about overall the Terence Crawford, Canelo Alvarez situation. And he said, well, I think that Canelo Alvarez is going to get full credit if he defeats Terence Bud Crawford. I don't personally believe that he will. And to a degree, it's understandable. Of course, Canelo Alvarez, in terms of weight, is going to have a massive size advantage. It just is what it is. He could potentially outweigh Crawford anywhere from 15 to 25 pounds. So, of course, that does have to be factored in there. It's not like it's not going to be an illegitimate excuse, if Crawford loses to Canelo and we just can't bring that up. Of course, it's going to be a valid excuse. But once again, I just don't like these games overall that certain people like to play, like Dante's Boxing Nation, where they state that Canelo is allegedly this basic Mexican fighter, and this guy to where, oh, the only thing that he's going to have is the massive size advantage, and he's going to have a massive advantage in this fight. Right. Well, that's understandable. But at the end of the day, if Canelo Alvarez apparently is nowhere near on the level of Terence Crawford, as Dante is trying to sit here and allege, well, then what that means is that this should at the very least be a 50-50 level fight. That's what that means. So once again, and Dante, of course, is also already trying to push up the next fighter that Crawford is facing, and that of Madrimov. He's trying to push him as the next Gennady Triple G Golovkin, and we'll talk about that in the next video. But once again, that's Dante's first hint that if Crawford beats Canelo, I'm going to give him all the credit in the world. And if Canelo beats Crawford, he's not going to get an ounce of credit from me. So once again, why should Canelo Alvarez take this fight when overall there's basically a lose-lose situation for him? There's almost nothing in it for him.
Because Canelo is not really fighting for legacy. He's fighting for survival. And his trainer actually said that. His trainer said, at this age.
Well, Canelo Alvarez has already built a great legacy. But at the end of the day, if you're still going to be fighting like a Canelo Alvarez in the professionals, and especially if you have a unification overall, or if you have all the belts throughout a weight class, yes, you're going to overall have to still continue to fight the best of the best. Like I remember Manny Pacquiao a few years ago, people said, well, why does he have to fight Terence Crawford? He already proved his career. Or Errol Spence Jr., right? Well, then give up the belts and then, just fight B grade level fighters, or, just state. I'm not here overall, once again, to fight big profile fights anymore. So I'm not going after the belts anymore. Then just do that. At the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez, he is going to have to still accept big profile level fights, because at the end of the day, he still has the belts. All right. And he still wants to be looked at as one of the top 10 pound for pound fighters in the world, and as debatably the best. You can't be looked at as the number one pound for pound fighter or as the best in the world, and you just decide to fight whoever you want. That's not how it works. Now, once again, do I believe that Canelo is just facing a lot of these cupcakes? No, I don't. I think that once again, that Jaime Munguia was a relatively great opponent. I think that he was an A- level opponent. Do I think that Avni Yildirim and John Ryder were great opponents? No, I don't. Jamel Charlo, probably another A- win. But, once again, Canelo Alvarez, he is going to have to get in the ring, with, higher grade level fighters. And that's why it's going to be interesting to see his next fight, because I don't really know what's next for him. Right now, it doesn't appear like he's going to fight David Benavidez. Crawford is a possibility, but I'm not quite too sure about that. Of course, you have that one Cuban mandatory that apparently, they're talking about that. Trust me, if Canelo Alvarez actually takes that fight, he's going to get railed over the coals, and somewhat deservingly. I understand that it's a mandatory, but at the end of the day, like, you can't fight a guy that is a complete unknown when you have guys out there like Benavidez and some other guys. Now, once again, those guys have already moved up a weight class, but Canelo's going to have to try to find somebody in his next fight that is relatively high profile, and Edgar Berlanga is not going to cut it either.
Canelo Alvarez, he has to be careful and choose his opponents wisely. This is what Eddie Reynoso said, and I made a video on it when he said it. The crazy thing is, Eddie Reynoso, he's talking about Canelo Alvarez's age when Canelo is only 33. But yet, not only is Crawford way smaller than Canelo Alvarez, but he's 36. The same age coincidence.
And that's another thing that Dante is going to do overall, once again, in order to strip away credit from Canelo Alvarez if Canelo Alvarez beats out of Terence Crawford. Oh, well, Crawford was 36 years old. But once again, Vasily Lomachenko this year turned 36. Are we ever going to hear about how Lomachenko just, turned 36 years old this year? Are we ever going to hear about how Tyson Fury was 36 years old this year against Usyk, and Usyk was 37, so that neither of those guys were even in their absolute prime? But if you ask Aki TV and Dante, both of those guys were in their prime. So once again, I tell people this all the time. People love to use this argument whenever it comes to certain fighters that they don't like about, oh, that fighter wasn't in their prime anymore when they beat them. You can still be in your prime or at a relative peak, and you can still be in someone of your mid to late 30s. All right. When you talk about Bernard Hopkins, to be quite honest with you, really didn't even have a peak until he hit his mid to late 30s. All right. When you talk about, Vladimir Klitschko, he still was somewhat at his relative peak, or at least at a very great point in his career at 39 years old. Okay. And then there's some other guys out there as well that I'm probably not mentioning. Mayweather at 36, Crawford at 36, still too debatably at, that time, the best fighters in the world.
Incidentally, Floyd Mayweather was when he beat the brakes off of Canelo.
And once again, this is also important to state. Canelo Alvarez is 33, turning 34 years old this year, but he's basically 37 years old. Because Dante will always tell you this, but because he loves to leave out a lot of information that doesn't favor his arguments, Canelo Alvarez, once again, is basically a 37-year-old in the sport at the time. Now, does that mean that, in my view, that Canelo should move around certain opponents, certain great opponents? Absolutely not. But at the end of the day, it does have to be discussed that Canelo is really about 37 years old, because Canelo has been fighting professionally ever since he's been 15 years old. When you talk about the resume, there's no fighter that has a better resume than him within the past 15 years. Or at least when you talk about the past 10 years, excuse me, pretty much ever since Floyd and Pacquiao, once they kind of began to meet more at the end of their career. Um, you know, so of course Canelo is going to be more aged than certain other fighters because he's been fighting now professionally for 18 years. So we can bring up this point about, yeah, Crawford is this years old. Crawford doesn't have the same amount of wear and tear on him as what Canelo does, because who's he really fought other than Errol Spence and Porter and Postal and Gamboa? It's like, who's he ever really fought? Did Mean Machine and Julius Ndongo and all those other guys like Ricky Burns, are those guys that really put a whole bunch of wear and tear on Terence Bud Crawford? Like, I'm sorry, but it just is what it is.
Canelo Alvarez. And Floyd Mayweather was 38 when he beat Manny Pacquiao, who was considered pound for pound top two.
Right, and Manny Pacquiao, I believe, was about 36 or 37 years old. So if we're going to keep these standards about, overall, that these guys that that, they were so old and that they were a grandpa, that they were nowhere near the same fighter. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not biting on this narrative about how these guys were nowhere near the same fighter or completely old, but yet they're still looked at as debatably the number one pound for pound fighter. I mean, you can maybe state that there's a little bit of age going on there if you want to, but at the end of the day, other than that, I can't really go much further than that.
The best fighters in the world at the time when they fought. And they're saying that he has to be matched carefully at age 33. That means Canelo and his own team, they don't even believe they're the best. And if that's the case, why is he still fighting? Obviously not for legacy, but for the payday. But on the flip side, Terence Crawford is definitely chasing greatness at the age of 36, with all the odds against him, moving up 3 weight classes, putting his undefeated record on the line against a fighter whose best weapon that night is going to be his natural size advantage. Terence Crawford is attempting to do.
Right, so once again, what is Dante's Boxing Nation just trying to tell you here? That Canelo Alvarez, that his best weapon is going to be his weight. So what is Dante trying to sit here and tell you? If Canelo Alvarez wins this fight, it's completely because of the weight. He's not more skilled than Crawford. He's not in the same realm. So that's why Canelo Alvarez has been very tentative to take this fight. Because basically, once again, if Canelo beats Crawford, there's not there's not going to be as many people as what certain people may think overall about, like, oh well, Canelo, he had such a display of skills. People aren't going to state that. All they're going to state is that he was bigger. And to be fair, that's a valid excuse. That's not something that should be completely ignored. Of course, that's something that needs to be mentioned. But at the end of the day, if Canelo just completely dominates Terence Bud Crawford and whoops his ass from the first round of the 12th, it's like, overall, is Dante going to be on there and state overall that, oh, well, Canelo Alvarez actually was better than what I thought? Of course he's not going to state that, because Dante's Boxing Nation has a narrative to play out.
Something that Canelo Alvarez would never do, because Canelo is claiming that David Benavidez is too big, and they fight.
Canelo Alvarez, no offense against Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation or Terence Bud Crawford, but when we really talk about Terence Bud Crawford, I mean, Canelo has actually already tried this against Dimitri Bivol. Canelo was outsized by about 2 weight classes over Dimitri Bivol. It's just that Dimitri Bivol didn't have as high as a profile as either Crawford or that of Canelo Alvarez. So Canelo has already tried this. Canelo, once again, ever since he's been at 160, he's fought multiple opponents, if not every single one, being bigger than what he's been, other than maybe that of Jamel Charlo. Every other opponent you could say was bigger than him. Gennady Golovkin, Danny Jacobs, Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, even potentially. Some of these other guys. Jaime Munguia. Like all these opponents have legit at least been a little bit bigger than Canelo Alvarez. Crawford has never actually been in a weight class where he's actually been smaller than those guys. I mean, so there's been some guys he's fought in the welterweight class where you can say, okay, maybe that guy was a bit girthier, maybe that guy was a bit lengthier. But in terms of being outsized like what Canelo has been against Danny Jacobs or Caleb Plant or Bivol or Jaime Munguia, has that ever happened? And those guys be legitimate A grade fighters. Has that ever happened in Crawford's career? No, it hasn't. It just hasn't. When he fought Spence, they were pretty much the same size. When he fought Porter, he actually was the bigger guy. When he fought some of these other guys, he usually was the same size or the bigger guy. Now, that's not me discrediting Crawford. He has moved up 3 weight classes, and I'm not stating that that's still not a great accomplishment, but Crawford is pretty much naturally built overall to be at the welterweight class. All right, Canelo is really meant to be at 160. All right, and he's already won belts in weight classes that are two really above what he actually is. Crawford really has not done that. 154, I think, will be the first time that he's ever fought in a weight class where those people will actually be a little bit bigger than him. And I'm not trying to strip away credit from Terence Bud Crawford, but there's certain fighters, once again, that when they fight in the lower weight classes, you can tell that they're a little bit bigger than what they actually are for that weight class. Like Devin Haney and Teofimo Lopez, for example, those guys weren't 135 pounders. Those guys are at the very least 140, if not 147 pounders. Same with Ryan Garcia. All right, Oscar De La Hoya, when he first started his career, a lot of people always say a big whoop about how Oscar De La Hoya, how he won titles at 135 and beat Chavez and beat Pernell CP Whitaker. Right, you were supposed to. Because you're like 5'11 with a 76-inch arm reach. You're a fucking welterweight in there against 135 pounders. So it's like you were supposed to beat those guys, if you were going to be on the A grade level, when it came down to it. But, now to be fair, there's been other fights where, a fighter, that they ended up losing to a guy that was a little bit, underneath, or a little bit lower than them, like Canelo lost to Mayweather. But also keep in mind that Canelo isn't a guy that's super lengthy. He's a guy that's about 5'7" with a 71-inch arm reach. So once again, to do what he's done in the sport, it shows you how much of a fantastic fighter that he has to be. But once again, let me not strip away credit from Crawford. He's one of the all-time great fighters. I think that, of course, him winning in those 3 weight classes, that it's great. But let's not sit here and act like Crawford that, he was much smaller than a lot of these guys in the weight classes that he was in. Because honestly, at 147, that was kind of the first time that he ever was really in the ring against fighters that were pretty much his own same size.
In the same weight class, we all know if Terence Crawford was a natural middleweight or super middleweight, without a doubt he would have won after David Benavidez, which is the reason why he's pound for pound the best fighter in the world.
Well, would he have? Because Terence Bud Crawford for a very long time, overall, once again, did not sign with the PBC and basically refused to fight those guys. Now, Crawford apparently stated that he just wanted them to move to the other side of the street, right? But they weren't going to do that. And once again, Dante didn't give Terence Bud Crawford any any criticism whatsoever. Say what you want about Canelo Alvarez, but Canelo has actually moved to different promotions. He's fought a lot of these different guys. So would he have? I'm not quite so sure. At the end of the day, right now, it's not like Crawford is taking the Jerron Boots Ennis fight. Now, I don't criticize him too harshly for that because I think that right now, Crawford looks at better fights on the horizon. I don't criticize him for that. But let's not sit here and act like Terence Bud Crawford just at any given moment in time has always given himself the best opportunities to fight those guys. He hasn't.
But not just the best fighter in the world. He's pound for pound one of the greatest fighters of all time.
Right, Terence Bud Crawford is pound for pound one of the greatest fighters of all time already. Top 5, top 10 unanimously according to these guys. Where is Canelo? Where is Usyk? Where is Inoue? Nowhere to be found on their list. Nowhere to be found on their list. And they'll say, oh, well, those guys don't have the resume. They have to prove themselves by fighting, the repeated greats. They have to fight so many contenders. How many all-time great contenders has Terence Bud Crawford really ever fought in his career? Like I said, when you talk about A-grade wins, he has Victor Postal, he has Yuriorkis Gamboa probably, he has Sean Porter, and he has Adalberto Spence Jr. That's it. Like, when you talk about Canelo, his resume is a decent amount better than Crawford's, and it's really not even comparable. When you talk about Usyk, I mean, that's debatable about who has the better resume, but Usyk was actually able to do something that, Crawford nor Canelo actually were able to do. So that's something overall that, Usyk deserves a lot of credit for. In a way, now is right there as well, kind of. So once again, how come Crawford is getting the most amount of credit out of all these fighters, and then all these other fighters, they have to, do more challenges. Like with Inoue recently, unifying his recent division at 122, and he's now a four-weight division champion. Inoue has to fight more challenges because that's what the all-time greats did, right? But Crawford, with all his challenges, it's already done. Now some may say, well, Inoue doesn't have quite the resume. He didn't beat someone like an Errol Spence Jr., right? So then let's go to Canelo, because Canelo's defeated someone on the level of an Errol Spence Jr., if not even higher, and that of Gennady Golovkin, and he's also beaten Lara and Jacobs and Plant and Saunders and Smith and Cotto and Kovalev and all these other guys. So how come Canelo Alvarez, like these guys will tell you that they think Marco Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales are above Canelo? Does that make any sense?
There's a reason why he's being compared to Floyd Mayweather right now. He just moved up to another weight class, 154. He's fighting against a very dangerous champion that reminds me of Gennady Golovkin. There's no guarantee that Terence Crawford is even going to win this fight.
You hear Dante's Boxing Nation trying to gas up this dude Madrimov already, and he said that he reminds me a lot of Gennady Golovkin. So you know what he's gonna say if Terence Bud Crawford ends up completely running through Madrimov, which is pretty much what I assume is gonna happen, because Madrimov comes across to me as a good fighter, but I don't know how great he actually is. He says who reminds me a lot of Gennady Golovkin. They're gonna try to pass this guy off as Gennady Golovkin, and then they're gonna state that if Crawford completely beats his ass, say, wow, can you believe that he did this, basically to a smaller version of Gennady Golovkin? Overall, can you believe that he did that to this guy Madrimov? This just shows how much better Crawford is than that of Canelo Alvarez. Even though this dude, don't get it twisted, this guy's a decent little fighter, but he's not Gennady Golovkin. Like Gennady Golovkin at one point in time was looked at as one of the top 5 most dangerous fighters on the planet. Like one of the top 5 best fighters on the planet. Like, come on, let's stop. Like this dude had a draw. He had a draw against a fighter, I believe that was looked at as a B or C grade level fighter just a couple of fights ago. Like, give me a fucking break.
Because it changes everything when you're moving up in weight. So with that being said, once again, if Canelo Alvarez is not going to challenge himself to take on the most dangerous opponents available, then we just have to look at this once again as Terence Crawford doing it. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. Let me tell you guys.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for the first part of this video. Let's now go on to the second one and see what Dante has to say. All right, so let's get to the second part of this video, and let's see overall what Dante has to say about this part.
Okay, so we already heard reports that Turki Al-Sheikh, he's seriously trying to put together a Canelo versus Terence Crawford fight. Now there are rumors that he wants to put together a 5-on-5 Team USA versus Mexico fight card with Terence Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez and Shakur Stevenson versus Isaac Pitbull Cruz or William Zepeda. Caleb Plant versus Jaime Munguia and some other fights as well. According to reports, all parties are interested, which is really good news. We know when it comes.
Well, I'm not really buying that Canelo Alvarez is interested as of quite of yet because I've not heard anything from him. Now, does that mean that it's impossible for that to happen? No, it doesn't, because I think that for Canelo Alvarez that he could at least look at this and say, you know what, a lot of people are counting Terence Bud Crawford as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter over me of this generation. And if I beat him, yes, a lot of people are going to state that, I was bigger, but at the end of the day, it will at least slow that progress down, especially if I can kind of dominate him and show off my skill set a little bit. It could be like a Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard situation where I could do a little bit better there. So Canelo might be very particularly interested in the fight, but we'll see. Because I would have to hear from, that of himself, because I'm not really quite sure what Canelo's going to do next, but we'll see.
Canelo Alvarez, if he has to fight David Benavidez or Terence Crawford, he's picking Terence Crawford. The only fighter that's daring to be great in that fight would be Terence Crawford. Credit to Turki Al-Sheikh.
Right, once again, and this is this is why Canelo Alvarez once again was not super huge on this fight. And don't get it twisted. I understand Dante's point, because at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez clearly is going to be the bigger guy. But don't do this stuff overall to where you say that Crawford is a lot better than Canelo Alvarez and clearly better than him. and Canelo Alvarez is this limited fighter, a guy who never chases greatness, and a guy who just fights bums and all this other stuff, and a guy that can't even hold a torch to Crawford's skill set. And then if Canelo Alvarez once again beats his ass, then all of a sudden, you're just going to state that it was just a size. No, right now you're stating that Crawford, that he's the only one that would be a clear A+ skilled level fighter. You've called Canelo an average Mexican fighter. You've said overall that he's probably not on the same level as Barrera and Morales and some other Mexican fighters. So what that means is that if Terence Bud Crawford, if he's on the level of Mayweather and Canelo Alvarez is not, and if he's not even on the level of Barrera and Morales and some of these other guys, because according to Dante, he's not even close to being the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. What that means is that Crawford should at least have a 50% chance, if not a 60% chance, to beat that of a Canelo Alvarez. That's what that should mean. Because Dante tries to act like Canelo is this B-level fighter. Okay, well then once again, if Canelo whoops the shit out of him, then what that means is that you should give Canelo props and say, you know what, his skill set was a bit better than what I thought. But Dante doesn't truly believe that Canelo Alvarez is a B-grade level fighter. He's just talking shit because once again, he has to discredit him at any turn whatsoever.
Cheek. Because he's trying to turn the sport of boxing into the #1 sport in the world. This Team USA versus Mexico card is supposed to be put together like an Olympic-style event. Turkey has already been successful at putting together the biggest fight card of all time when it comes to pound for pound, the best fighter in the world, Terence Crawford, fighting against.
And once again, where's the conversations about Mr. Alexander Usyk? You notice that they're not mentioning Usyk whatsoever, who just beat an A-grade level fighter that was 30 pounds heavier than him, outlengthened him by several inches, and out-heightened him by several inches. Where's the conversations about Alexander Usyk being #1 pound for pound? There's not one. There's not one when it comes down to it. But anyways, isn't that interesting? Once again, they have to try to keep telling you that Crawford is for sure the #1 pound for pound fighter because of their inferiority complex. And don't get it twisted, if you still have Crawford at #1, that's up to you. You have a great debate about that. Crawford definitely could be the #1 pound for pound fighter. But it's just interesting how they're completely not talking about the Usyk or Fury situation whatsoever, unless it's to criticize Tyson Fury. They literally have not made one video about if Usyk is debatably #1 pound for pound. Crawford recently stated that Usyk could potentially be the #1 pound for pound fighter in the world, and there hasn't been one video about it. Not one video where they said that Crawford was trying to appease to the race fans, because they even know that that would sound stupid after what Usyk just accomplished.
Madrimov. And we're not just talking about the main event, we're talking about the entire card. There's never been a fight card stacked like this. I mean, the only thing that probably even comes close is probably a boxing Olympics finals. So Alois Sheik, he's really trying to change the game in the sport of boxing. But in order for all of this to come to fruition, Crawford, he's going to have to get past Madrimov, which will not be an easy fight. I predict
Yes, it will be. let's just stop the bullshit. Madrimov is a good low fighter. He's not great. All right? It is what it is. Once again, in one of his last 3 fights, he had a draw against an unknown fighter. Let's stop the bullshit. All right? Once again, here Dante goes again, trying to make sure that every opponent that Crawford fights is on the A-grade elite level, but then every opponent that the fighters that he needs to tear down, they're all bums. Here we go again.
Madrimov would be a much tougher fight than Sebastian Fundora would have been. Madrimov, he kind of...
How do we know that? Once again, Madrimov, we don't know anything about him. He's had 10 total fights.
Reminds me of a Gennady Golovkin. Not only does he have a lot of power, but he has a lot of experience. In fact, he even sparred with Bivol to help him prepare for the Canelo.
Right, so that makes him exactly like Gennady Golovkin. This is, once again, like you have to be really dense overall to really believe overall a lot of Dante's analyzations. Once again, this is a lot of the shit that he tries to pull. Once again, I'm telling you what already he's going to do. If Crawford ends up completely dismantling Madrimov, which more than likely he's going to do, overall he's going to say, wow, he basically defeated Gennady Golovkin in that way. Canelo couldn't do that against Gennady Golovkin. Canelo, had 2 controversial decisions over Golovkin. That's all he's going to state. And people are actually gonna bite into that shit because a lot of people are idiots. But it is what it is. No, Madrimov is not Gennady Golovkin. He's a good low fighter, someone that is a little bit unproven. Someone overall who's a very good fighter, but we don't know enough about him.
Alvarez fight. What makes the fight even tougher for Crawford is he's moving up in weight. We don't know how he's going.
Right? He's moving up in weight against a guy that he's going to outlengthen by several inches. He's moving up in weight overall against a guy that has 11 total fights on his record. He's moving up against a guy that just ended up winning the title because it was vacant. So I'm not stating once again that maybe potentially that Majimov cannot be an A grade level fight. Maybe it is. But at the end of the day, once again, let's stop let's stop gassing up overall this opponent like he's Gennady Golovkin or Vasily Lomachenko. Like, come on, let's stop.
To look at the new weight class. But we know if he's successful, his next stop is going to most likely be at 168, assuming he's successful against Madrimov. Let's see how it all plays out. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought overall that I would talk about that. Found it very particularly interesting once again. So when I was having a live debate, I believe a few weeks ago to a month ago, I believe against that one gentleman where he stated that, well, I believe that Canelo will get a great amount of credit if he defeats Terence Bud Crawford. Well, from a lot of people, he's not going to. And that's why Canelo Alvarez, once again, was a little bit tentative to fight that opponent, but it is what it is. And once again, I also wanted to do this because Dante, once again, when it comes to Canelo or other fighters, even fighting guys that are A grade level fighters, he always has to try to degrade it in some sort of way or say that guy, oh, he already lost or he wasn't coming off of the best of performances, but then when it comes to someone that he needs to gas up, then all of a sudden it's in a completely different light. You notice that Lomachenko recently, by the way, he beat George Kambosos when George Kambosos was coming off of a controversial win over Maxi Hughes, and none of these guys mentioned anything about it, and they said Vasily Lomachenko looked like the best version of himself, and he, beat George Kambosos in a way that no one else did. You know why they didn't say anything about how George came off of a controversial decision? Because they realized that Vasily Lomachenko could boost the career of Shakur Stevenson. So once again, they have to make it seem like Lomachenko, even though now he's 36 years old, basically, they have to make it seem like he's still at the peak of his career while saying that other fighters, like a Crawford right now, are not at the peak of their career. So once again, it just goes to show you how slimy that a lot of these channels are and that what their true motivations are, which is completely racially motivated. But it is what it is. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.